Ready.
Madam Chair, we are live.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's call the meeting to order. It's 6:01, and our first item is the adoption of the agenda.
Madam
Jeanette,
Warden, sorry,
Yes.
Madam Warden, if I could just interrupt for a second, if we could do a verbal roll call to ensure that I have quorum.
Okay, do you want to do that?
So Warden Smith,
I'm here.
present. Councillor Doyle, if you could just say present if you're here.
Present.
Councillor Higgins,
Present.
Deputy Warden Vandewall,
Present.
Councillor Higgs,
Here.
Councillor McDonald,
I'm here.
Councillor Rebel,
Present.
and Councillor Martin.
Present.
Thank you, Madam Warden, you have quorum.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just have to get my agenda up here again. Okay, so we have our first motion. And this is going to require 2/3 of the majority to vote, I believe, Jeanette. And that is to be it resolved that procedural bylaw 2013-0020, section 7.5 be waived to permit other business to be added to the agenda to consider a motion regarding the change of location of the October 21st, 2020 regular council meeting and the October 20 and 21st, 2020 committee of the whole budget deliberations, and as amended be adopted. So that's to move our meeting. All those, any discussion first? Okay, moved by
I'll move that.
Dennis,
Dennis.
seconded by Bill.
Yes.
All those in favor, and I need to see your hands for a few minutes here. Okay, all those in favor?
Voting yes from South Frontenac.
Ron?
Yes.
Okay, that's more than 2/3, that's unanimous. Motion's carried. All right, is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in general nature thereof on any item on tonight's agenda by any member of council? Ron, do you have a question? Or are you froze? I think Ron Higgins is frozen with his hand up.
I must be frozen. I have no disclosures or pecuniary interest.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I don't hear any disclosures. So we'll move on then to our next item. And that is Ms. Lisa Severson from EORN Communications Stakeholder Relations Officer, who's going to bring us up to date on the cell gap coverage project. Take it away, Lisa. Lisa's internet is about as good as mine.
For as many times as I'm on Zoom in a day, I always forget to unmute myself. So maybe by the end of this presentation, you would be happy if I was muted, but we'll give it a go here. So first of all, thank you very much to the county and the councillors for having us attend tonight. I'd like to introduce the staff that are with us tonight from EORN. So everyone, I'm sure knows Jim Pine. He is the CAO for the County of Hastings and the co-lead, one of our 3 co-leads for the project. So Jim will be doing part of the presentation tonight. We also have Marco Smith, who I know the county is probably missing terribly, but we're very grateful to have him as one of our staff in the communications department. And we've been putting him to work. So He's learning lots of new and interesting things. So Marco will also he'll be participating in the presentation as well at the end of the presentation. And I'm thinking we were supposed to have our customer care specialist and admin support person, Heather Rightly. I'm not sure if she's been able to join, but she was going to also join tonight as an observer. So again, thank you very much. And of course, Madam Chair sits as one of our board members. She is our vice chair of the EORN Board of Directors. And so we're very thankful for that as well. So I'm going to get right into the presentation. So I think the county
Before you-
staff will, oh, sorry.
Someone have a
I'm
question?
just going to say, before you go any further, Warden Smith, can we ask everybody to mute? I'm hearing some background.
Yes, a good thing. So everyone mute for now.
Madam Chair, we also have someone with their hand up in the corner there. I'm not sure, maybe if that's Heather Rightly.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, it's Cindy Kelsey. I just hit the wrong button, but I'm at the meeting.
You're just checking the hand motion. Okay, that's better. Everyone's muted.
Madam Chair, again, so Lisa Severson, just so you're aware, Heather Rightly is in as an attendee, and if you have any questions, she can answer those.
Okay, great. So I think the county staff will, they will do the slide deck for us. So as soon as that comes up, we can start the presentation. I'm not seeing it unless you guys are. Oh, there it is. Okay, so we can go right on to the next slide. So tonight we want to we know you have a full agenda, so we want to basically give you just a bit of a reminder of what we did in the EORN Phase 1 project. We'll give you an update on the cell gap project, which is underway. And then Jim is going to speak to you about the 5010 megabit per second and the gig analysis, which the County of Frontenac provided $40,000 towards that study, as did the other 12 counties in the EOWC. And we'll be providing you with information around that project. So if we can go to the next slide. So just a bit of a reminder, the county contribution for our first project was almost $540,000. The investments made in Frontenac County were about over $8 million. We invested in, we call it business parks, but it also could have been business clusters. And I think Verona was an area that received benefit from that of about $500,000 invested into business parks through our first project. And the county's return on their investment was approximately 15-1. So the total number of households covered in the county was about 14,500, and people received access up to 10 megabits. And I know the words up to is a painful subject for many, as we're all struggling right now, especially with COVID and all of the different types of new platforms we're using for meetings. But again, Jim will address that in his part of the presentation. We covered about 81.4% of your county at an up to 10 megabit speed. And we also provided satellite coverage. We didn't want anyone left behind. And what I can say is that since our project, most of the private sector partners that we partnered with are now offering packages of up to 25x1, even on satellite. There has been over $100 million of investment by the private sector in the region since the project completed, all on their own dime. And I know places like Harrowsmith and others are receiving fiber to the home build outs, which would not have been possible, or it would have taken much longer for those types of projects to happen if it hadn't have been for the EORN initial project. Frontenac County was our busiest county. You were a part of 5 different access zones. So that's the last mile that got services to people's homes. And the contracts within those 5 zones were awarded to either Bell, ExploreNet, or Storm Internet. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So a little bit about technology. So you're going to have us here today. We're going to talk about both mobile or cellular broadband and fixed broadband. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is the CEL project, and that is mobile broadband. So if you're in your vehicle, if you're out at your dock and your Wi-Fi doesn't, your broadband within your cottage or your home doesn't reach the dock, many times people are using their cell phones, their tablets, and they're able to browse, they're able to post to social media, look up banking, all of that while they're on the road. So there is a difference. Again, those services come from towers and they're a wireless type of service. So you're going to hear me talk about 2 different types of wireless connectivity. One is from cellular or mobile networks. If we can go to the next slide, please. So with fixed broadband, as many of you are probably using this evening, that's the broadband you have at your place of work or at your home. It's either you are probably receiving it through either a fiber, if you're one of the lucky folks in Eastern Ontario to have a fiber connection, DSL, which is through telephone lines, which would be, you might be a Bell customer. Fixed wireless, so there are towers. You may have a receiver on the top of your an old TV antenna or your roof, and it's a point-to-point wireless connection, and you would receive your service from a tower. And then there's also satellite. And so most businesses would use the applications for inventory, payroll. We're all using it tonight. I'm on my own home internet. I'm on a fixed wireless type of fixed broadband from a local supplier here near Prescott. So as many of you are as well. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So what is the technology that will be going into our networks? So our model, our demand model that we based the project on was on a 4G LTE network. And I'm sure many of you have heard that terminology in the past. One thing though that is very important is we need to ensure that this network that we are going to be building can meet today's needs, but is also scalable and able to evolve as technology evolves, and that it can meet the future needs for the entire region. As many of you have heard me speak before at your county council, towers are going to have to be constructed. We cannot, there will not be a project without those towers. That is where the infrastructure is. Radios are added to towers, and we are encouraging through our project that TSPs share the infrastructure where possible. Right now, we are in the throes of evaluating the proposals. And once we know where those towers, or have a better idea of where those towers will be after we have negotiated the contract with the proponent or proponents, we will be coming back to your council and providing that information to you. It is public information. We did have 2 submissions to the request for proposal. One was submitted by Bell and the other was submitted by Rogers. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So for those of you, I'm sorry, I'm getting a notice to say my internet connection is unstable, so I hope everyone can still hear me. What is the technology? So again, we've provided links within the slide deck, and the county staff, if you don't already have a copy, they can share this with you. And you can click on these sites and it will explain a little bit more about energy and radio frequency, including 5G. If we could go to the next slide, please. Uh-oh. Okay, so what are our project goals? So we're hoping that we can achieve our goal. Our main goal is that 99% of the demand area. So our demand area is where people live, people work, and people travel on major roadways will be able to make that telephone call if they need to. So that is our number one goal, is to achieve 99% coverage of our demand area to be able to make that call. Our second goal is to achieve 95% coverage in the same region where people work and travel, with standard definition service levels. So if you wanted to get on your phone while you're in your car, if you were waiting, say in a parking lot, you had to check your banking, you could go on and do that quite easily in 95% of the area. And for 85% of the area, we want people to be able to access the level of service for high definition services. So if you wanted to use your data and stream a movie through Netflix and wanted to watch it in high definition, we would like that to be able to happen in 85% of the region. Another example of that would be perhaps your EMS team could be out on a call, they needed to share video with the hospital, and they could send that type of video in a high definition format, which would be important for both of them when they were trying to assist a patient. So can we go on to the next, please? So what are the funding partners? So I think most of you know that the EOWC and 9 of 10 of the separated municipalities as part of the Eastern Ontario Mayor's Caucus have contributed their share to equal $10 million. Canada has committed to up to $71 million, as has Ontario. And it is anticipated that the telecom service providers, the TSPs, will need to also contribute at least $61 million. So the total for the project is $213 million, and Frontenac County's contribution is $389,750. We can go to the next slide, please. So one question we get quite regularly is, how can municipalities help push this project forward? Municipalities can provide municipal lands for the telecom service providers who may want to build towers in their municipalities. We also think it's very important to have tower siting plans in place. You as the local municipalities are the land use authorities and will be asked to approve proposed towers in your municipalities. We are working on a bit of a resource guide to assist municipalities with that. That's one of the items that Marco is working on. And we're hoping that we have that completed by the end of the year and out to the municipalities. It would also be beneficial if municipalities could work with the TSPs to expedite permitting. It doesn't mean that you cut corners, but they're going to be dealing with many municipalities, and if they have to wait 6 or 8 weeks for building permits, etc., it really does slow down the process. And this is a 5-year build out. We have to have everything completed by 2025. And the quicker we can get things built out, the quicker then we can also have service for residents and businesses. One other guide that I would like, or resource that Marco was also working on, it's a resource in regards to 5G and radio frequency. And we're hoping that that guide as well will be available to you before the end of the year. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So here's the status of the project. We hired our staff. March 30th was the start date for our new team. We issued the request for proposal for the Cell Gap project on April the 20th. It closed September the 3rd. We signed the transfer payment agreement with the province on May the 15th, and the province has an agreement with the federal government. So everything flows from the feds to the province to us. We are currently, as I said, in the evaluation stage of the RFPs. We're hoping that our board of directors, we take to them at the November 5th board meeting, preferred proponent or proponents. Once they have provided input and approved the preferred proponent, we will enter into contract negotiations, and our goal is to have those contract negotiations completed by February of 2021. We hope to start construction in 2021 as well. And as I said, it's a 5-year build out. The construction component of it will be completed by 2025, and we will have ongoing contract monitoring until 2030. So it sounds like a long way away, but we're already halfway through October. So 2020 is quickly coming to an end, and the years go by quite quickly when we're building out these types of projects. Before the construction can start, we will have obligations to do duty to consult with our First Nations. There are 6 in our actual region, and we worked with them in the last project. So we're hoping again that they too will see benefit in the project, but we have to have the duty to consult completed prior to any shovels going in the ground. So that is the responsibility of Jim and myself, and Marco is also working with us on the First Nations, as is Heather, and we're quite confident we can get that done. So I think that may be it. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jim Pine, unless anyone has any questions in the first segment before we get into what we consider traditional broadband. And that's what Jim's going to talk about. So I don't know if anyone has any questions about the cell project, but I can take them now if you'd like.
Ron Higgins, go ahead.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, Lisa. The first one is related to tower locations. You said they're going to be coming out from the proponent. Is there any way, when that comes out, are they going to have locations by township, by county on where they would like to put them so that we can start to educate our landowners in the area of potential opportunities for them?
That is our hope, Ron. They may not be so initially in probably after our evaluation, during our negotiations, if everything is going well, we may get that information a bit sooner rather than later, but it will be by municipality because each municipality is their own land use authority. So we will try to provide that to you as quickly as we can and when we're able to do that. So I can guarantee you that is one of the things that we are flagging with the proponents when we speak to them.
Okay. And my second question is the federal funding, has it been released to the province yet? Or I know that in some situations, the federal government is slow on releasing funds. Has that been released, or is it just sitting in a pool waiting?
So as far as we know, the funding there hasn't been an issue. To be quite frank with this group, we've only made one initial claim. So our second claim goes in. We haven't done any building yet either. So it's just for our second claim will go in at the end of October, and that is for our second quarter because we go from March the provincial calendar. So as far as I know, the money is flowing. It's something I can take back and ask our CFO, Lisa Hirvey, and ask that question, but we haven't heard of any problems with money flowing from the federal government.
Thank you, Lisa.
Any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, Fred Fowler, I have a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Fred.
Thank you. There is a company, a private company that's willing to put a tower up in Snow Road Station. And when they get that tower done, how soon can we see operations on the tower? Or are they going to have to wait in line like everybody else?
So I think if they're already working, so that is outside our project at this point. So that is something that is a company that is a TSP who is, I guess, coming into Snow Road Station. There would be no waiting in line because it's a separate. I don't know who the company is, so it's hard for me to speak to how quickly they will roll it out. I do know that in some instances, and I'm not saying that this is the case in your municipality, but there have been instances in the past where vertical real estate agents who represent the companies will actually go secure land, go through the land use authority process, secure the land, and then they may sit on that land for 2-3 years, and sometimes those towers don't get built. That won't happen with our project because we will, it's mandated that they will have to construct the towers, put on the equipment, and offer services to people.
Would that be the companies that you're talking about? Would that be like Bell and Rogers?
Correct. They are the only two that they would own that tower. Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Lisa,
Yeah.
Bruce Higgs from Frontenac Islands. I have a question. Will Frontenac Islands be getting this service as well? And the reason I ask is because we are so close to the U.S. side that a lot of people on the south side of Howe Island are they're picking up the signals on the U.S. side and the roaming. And I'm just wondering if that problem will be addressed.
So with that, we haven't seen the final design. We do know that how we've created the demand mapping, we've used MPAC data. So we do know where people live and where people work. So we'll have to, we know that there's demand. I am hoping that if towers are built on the islands, that it does help with the situation that many folks are experiencing. I will sometimes, if I'm driving from Brockville to Prescott on the number 2 highway, and if I don't have my roaming shut off, that oftentimes will happen to me as well. I'll pick up the signal from across the river. So as much as it's a lot of people just forget that their roaming is on. So if there's a way that you can suggest to residents living on the island, if they're able to shut their roaming off, that will also help with those types of charges that go on their bills for roaming. But there's a part of, you can turn roaming off on your cell phone. I know it's not the answer, at least for now. And again, we will know better after we've seen the proposed network from the the carriers. And
Lisa,
I will take that back to my tech team for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say that is one of the things that our folks are looking at. We're certainly aware of it.
Okay, let's take one more question if we have one, and then we'll have Jim present next.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, my question is the cell phone tower provides broadband to a lot of my neighbors and myself included, and we use the hub service. Is that considered fixed wireless, or just what is the hub? It's not a very good service. It's very slow. That's why I'm in the office tonight, because it won't support Zoom. What's it called?
So that hub service is actually running off the cellular mobile network. So it's running off of the cell tower. So I do know that in Eastern Ontario, Bell is rolling out on their own dime a technology called wireless. It's a fixed wireless radio that they're actually putting on their cell towers, so there's more of a reach, but it's to provide traditional fixed wireless broadband. So it's not a hub. It is fixed wireless like you would get from other carriers, and they are offering that in many areas. I would suggest, if you would like to send me an email and with your home address, I can actually send my Bell contact an email and ask if he could see if it is available in your area.
Well, that'd be much appreciated, but by myself,
rolling
all my
it out now. Yeah, sure. They're rolling it out in 2020 and 2021. They have to build fiber to some of those cell towers to be able to offer that type of service. So I just wanted, anybody else, just please flip me a quick email, and I can send that off to Bell to see if it's available for you.
Fine, thanks very much.
Okay, let's have Jim do his part of the presentation.
Thanks very much, Your Honor. Actually, what this next part of the presentation will actually solve the problems that we're just talking about in terms of the hub and stuff, if we can do this. So EORN's objectives have always been to make East Ontario the best connected region in North America. And as Lisa said, there are really two ways of doing that, either through mobile or cell networks, or through traditional or fixed broadband. And our first project was based on improving fixed broadband at your home, basically, either through some different technologies. But what we've all come to realize is that the demand for speed and bandwidth continues to grow exponentially every year. And what the Warden's Caucus wanted to have EORN do was look at some solutions that would help really deal with that problem, both in short and in the long term. And so what we're really talking about is improving the traditional broadband through the what we call the 5010 or the Gig project. And you'll know that the CRTC has set a minimum standard for Canadians in terms of speed, download and upload at 5010. That's what they're saying, 50 megabits down, 10 megabits up. Up is important as well, especially if you're uploading files. So they're saying that's the minimum, and 90% of Canadians should get that by 2021. Well, the Warden's Caucus said, well, we don't want to be in that last 10% that can't get it. So they asked EORN to do an analysis of what it would cost to bring Eastern Ontario to the minimum. And then they also said, which I think was quite prescient of them, to say, let's also look at going further. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So when we did our analysis back in 2019, of course, what we found and what we realized is that a lot of Eastern Ontario, in fact, the majority of Eastern Ontario, doesn't have access to the minimum standard of 5010. And so 46% of the rural areas and businesses have some access, but the majority don't. And even when you put in all of the cities, it's still around 63%. So what we knew, but we were able to prove, is that there's a big gap in Eastern Ontario in terms of people's ability to get better broadband at home or at the business. Next slide. So they, as I said before, the Warden's Caucus also said, please look at something that is much larger than just getting to the minimum, and that's the gig project. So we did a lot of work and a lot of analysis to figure out how much it would cost to do either of those projects. And so here are the numbers. The estimated cost of getting to 50/10 or to the minimum for 95% of the demand areas, and Lisa spoke about demand areas, that's where people live and work across the region, with a bit of a mix of technologies, including wireline or fiber or cable. And then the 20% would be on a fixed wireless, sort of just what we were talking about in terms of what Bell is rolling out. And we also costed out the gig project, which is 1,000 megabits of speed. So minimum standard set by the CRTC is 50 down, 50/10. The Warden said, we want to look at something that's actually quite generational, and that's the gig project. So we did an analysis of bringing a gig, which is really bringing a piece of fiber or a cable to homes and businesses, to your physical property, so that it gives you certainty in terms of service, and it has the ability to be scalable and deliver a tremendous amount of bandwidth. And in this case, we've costed 1,000 megabits or 1 gig per second. Next slide. Here's the cost. So to do a 50/10 project, it's between $500 and $750 million to do our region. And the estimated cost, if you were doing this on your own in Frontenac County, to do a 50/10 project is almost $31 million. So it would be an extremely large project to do on your own. And then we costed out, as I said, the gig project to 95% of our demand area. And the estimates are between 1.2 billion and 1.6 billion. The key variable in both of those projects is the cost of getting on utility poles, Hydro One poles, and dealing with the requirement to replace poles, the cost to attach fiber to those poles. So we've built in this range. The high end is about $30 a meter, and the low end is down around 15 to 20, which is what it's like in some other provinces. So that's the range for the projects. And if you were doing a gig project alone, you can see that the number is almost $92 million just for Frontenac County. So a big project, but when we work together, we can do great things. So it was really important for us to understand how much this would cost to do either of those projects. But the Warden's Caucus, and in fact, the Mayor's Caucus as well, have said we really should be trying to do the gig project. Sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, Jim, but so you can see there's quite a big gap between the 50/10 and the gig. And the reason for that is when they were doing the analysis, they put a lot of fixed wireless into the network. And it is a cheaper route to go because of what Jim talked about, pole replacements, etc. So that's why there's such a discrepancy between the 30 million and the 91.
Yeah, they're different technologies, generally speaking. Next slide. So I think I've already spoken to this, generally speaking. It's just what Lisa said. In terms of the 50/10 model, it's a mixture of wireline and fixed wireless to get to that 50/10 capability. And in the gig project, it is about taking a piece of fiber or a cable and attaching it to your home or business. So two different kinds of technologies that have different costs, obviously. But with the gig project, there is a lot more capacity available to do, and while it costs more, it also can last a lot longer fiber has a lifespan of more than 20 years and is scalable. Okay, next slide. This is just a simple rendering of when we talk about the technologies that we're using. You can see the cloud is the internet, and that's our backbone. So that's a transport fiber. You've got a middle mile that's also transport fiber-based, points of presence off of which companies connect. And if they're doing wireline, you can see the little triangle. That's where the wires go. A piece of fiber or a cable goes directly to your home or your business. And if you're talking about fixed wireless, you can see that there's a tower and it broadcasts to homes where you have an antenna on your home. So we just thought it was important to understand a little bit about the different technologies, because as Lisa said, it drives different kinds of costs when you're doing a project. Next slide. One of the important things that EORN does is it has a pretty intensive analysis process to figure out exactly where we need to build new infrastructure, and that's really the bottom end of the graph here, the chart, the market failure analysis. But we also absolutely need to know where the demand is and where we need to cover and at what kind of capacity. So that's the part that Lisa talked about in terms of working with impact data. So we know where people live, and in the mobile case, we know where they travel. We know the roads that people are generally traveling on the major ones. So we want to know what the demand is, where people are, and what they need to use, how much they need. And then we do an exercise of looking at where some of that supply might already exist. Because again, we don't want to overbuild where there's enough supply, but we want to know where there are gaps. And that's the third piece. So where is the difference between the demand and the supply? That's our gap. And then we look at what's the best way to try and fix that in terms of the modeling. In the case that I'm talking about, it's the 5010 or the GIG project, were the solutions that we landed on in terms of trying to develop a cost for them. And you've seen that. So it's a very intensive, it took us, I think, Lisa, more than a year to do all of the work to understand where we had to go, what we had to do, and how much it might cost. Because when we go to government or to our private sector partners, we need to really understand what we're talking about and what we're asking them for, and that we have the evidence to back it up. And that's exactly what we've done, both in the 5010 case and in the GIG proposal as well. And of course, we did that with the cell gap program. So it's an intensive process. It takes time, it costs money. And that's the money that Lisa had mentioned, be the $40,000 that you had contributed as a county, and my county had done as well. But we've put it to good use, and in order to come up with good evidence to propose another project. Next slide. So again, we've already mentioned this a number of times in terms of modeling for demand. These are households, businesses, and facilities. And we've assigned a certain capacity to a household or to a multi-res building or an institution, because we need to know that's how you calculate demand or estimate demand. We've used detailed impact data. And as David Fell often says, if we haven't captured a property where people are living in your community, they're probably not paying taxes. You'd probably like to know that as everyone else would do, but we've done it's very accurate in terms of knowing where people live, and that helps us develop the coverage and the capacity requirements for projects. And in EORN's case, we use a very detailed approach. It's 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid for mapping purposes. So that's quite detailed in terms of knowing where the demand and the coverage requirements are. So we're very confident, I should say, in knowing those demand and coverage requirements. Next slide. This is a representation of our 5010 demand, coverage, and capacity. So the green, the red, and the blue represents where there are people or businesses that generate demand. The pinky colored piece is, no surprise, this is in some of the towns and cities where there are greater than 20 households per square whatever kilometers, I can't remember there. But it's obviously where there's a higher density of folks. Blue being where there's fewer, and green as well, where there's a little bit less than the pink. The white areas, there's nobody living there. There's no homes, there's no properties. There are generally no roads as well through there. So those are no demand areas. So they just don't generate any demand. And of course, we wouldn't want to propose running fiber or a fixed wireless solution to an area that's white, where there's obviously no users or no customers. So this is why we're really comfortable in knowing where the demand areas are and the kind of capacity that we need, because we've done this very detailed mapping. And this is for the 5010 project proposal. Next slide. We've just tried to render it as best we can to look at Frontenac County itself. And we know there's a piece in the north end that we haven't captured on the map, but you can see again where we've identified where people are living, where there are businesses, institutions, and the density in your particular area. And in large part, Hastings County looks a lot like Frontenac as well, particularly in the northern spot. So we know where everybody is, and that's critical to making sure that we can supply them if we were doing either the 5010 or the gig project. Make sure we cover them. Next. Again, no surprise, the gig coverage map looks very similar in a way to the 5010, but it does generate more demand, because one of the truisms is that as people are able to get more capacity or speed, they use it. And so the gig project has a natural higher capacity component to it, because people will use more on it. But again, we know where people live, where they're living, where there are businesses, so that we can plan to connect them with that piece of fiber or cable through our mapping process. Next. And this is an interesting slide, and just want to take half a second on it, because it's based on comparing data that's available from ISED, which is Industry, Science, Economic and Development. It's a federal department that maps out the supply of capacity and broadband availability across the country. And what we've done here is taken what ISED has mapped out as the availability where there currently is access to 5010 service, and juxtaposed it against the demand area that we have in Eastern Ontario. So if we think Eastern Ontarians should be able to get a minimum of 5010, what this slide shows you what's currently available and what needs to happen in order for us to say that our region is covered. So it was an interesting, I think, juxtaposition of what currently is available according to the federal government through ISED, and what we need to do so that people can actually get access to it as many more. And you can see this is the challenge that we face in Eastern Ontario in terms of 5010 coverage. And of course, it would be the same or more when it comes to the gig project, because they haven't mapped out gig. There are some areas where there is fiber to the home, as Lisa mentioned. I think Sydenham's one of the communities in Frontenac that has some access to it, but places in Kingston or some areas in Belleville. In fact, I have a fiber to the home connection here in Belleville where I am today. So there are some areas where there's a gig to the home available, but not greatly across the region. So this is, I think, an interesting map to show you what the challenge is for all of us in even just getting to the minimum of 5010. And of course, as I said before, the Warden's Caucus, and I think rightly so, has said we shouldn't just go for the minimum. We should try to fix this thing for a generation and really endorsed pushing forward with the Gig project as its primary objective. And that's what we've been working on. Next slide. And again, we've just given you a bit of a more of a drill down view of what ISED says is currently available. Oh, wouldn't you know it, that's my phone. And what we say is needed. I'm just going to hang up my phone. Hang on. The benefits of working at home, I'm sorry. Next slide. So Lisa, is this where Mark was jumping in or? Okay.
I think so.
I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any before we, I turn it over to Marco.
Okay, anyone have any questions?
Well, thanks very much, Your Honor. And we,
Yes. I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I guess the chair didn't see my hand up. I have two questions, Jim. The first question is, in that chart you were describing about wireline, cable, and fiber. Can you clarify how satellite fit into those categories? Is it cable? Or how
no,
does satellite
it's
fit
actually
into that definition?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually, Ron, and I should have covered it. Satellite is a different, a separate technology for getting access to high-speed services, and we made use of some satellite technology in our first project. And of course, there's work going on right now, what they call low Earth orbiting satellites, or LEOs, that will be able to provide better broadband service as well. And in fact, they probably will still be part of the solution for those few areas where we simply can't get to because of cost, in whether it's in Hastings County or perhaps in Frontenac. Satellite still might be the only way we can get people connected, but what we're trying to do is minimize the need to do that, and particularly in the Gig project, where we'd like to get to at least 95% of the region with a wire, a piece of fiber, to give that certainty of service. But the satellite technology is evolving. It takes time for them to put the array of satellites out, and we're unsure, of course, about the cost at the end of the day to the consumer and its reliability.
I have a second question, Ron.
Yeah, in the white areas, you said you're not going to worry about putting towers up in the white areas. I noticed in one white area in particular, in between North Frontenac, when you travel out of North Frontenac down to Highway 7 through Central Frontenac, there's no coverage there, but it's a roadway. And most of the white area, I understand, is Crown land, but I don't want you to ignore all the white areas because some of it is critical for emergencies and things like that.
Sure. Well, again, Ron, we're certainly, when it comes to the cell project, hopefully that major roadway is going to be covered under the cell project in terms of mobile. But if there are some areas you think that we've missed, please let us know. It's not too late to let us know so that we can make sure we include that in the demand area.
Okay, any other questions?
Thank you.
Yes, Bruce.
Go ahead.
Bruce Higgs. I'm just wondering, Jim, if there's an easy way for us to check how close we're coming to the 5010 power in our area. Is there an easy way for us to check that?
Well, I guess the best way, the most accurate way, is to ISED has a series of maps that describe where they think it exists. It's based on the internet service providers across the country have to report annually to ISED about what they're providing and where. And so ISED builds its data maps off of those. And of course, where we got our information, that it came from ISED as well. So we can look at exactly where you're asking in terms of a particular area to try and help you out. But we've been going back, as I understand it, back to the ISED database and looking ourselves as well.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more question and then we'll ask Marco to finish up.
And Madam Chair, I'm going to have to drop off in a moment because Lisa and I are doing another one of these with Lennox and Addington at 7.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions? Okay, not hearing any. Marco, you get to take us at the end of the presentation, probably the best part.
I can bring it home, but yeah, we do have a presentation at 7 o'clock. I don't have to be there right from the start, but I also don't know how to answer some of your very tough questions. So I just want to say thank you, and on a personal note, I want to say thank you to Frontenac County, and that I miss the county, but the things that I've learned about municipal politics are being put in to very good use, I think, here at EORN. So thank you for that. I just wanted to do a quick recap on how in mid-April and early May, we had a few meetings with MPs and MPPs, and we were already presenting this material, even on the GIG proposed project. And it was one of our own Eastern Ontario MPs who said, well, why would you do a 50-10 project? Why would you not go into a GIG project? Because you'll have to come back in 5 or 10 years from now and ask for funding, just basically as happened in our first project. After our first project, even though that very much fulfilled the mandate that it was set out to do. So that gave us hope, and we went to the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, who gave us a resolution of support in May, and our board did the same not much later. And what's very positive, until this very moment, there has not been an MP or an MPP who has said no. If anything, they're saying the opposite. They say, keep pushing. This is the right time. And we feel that COVID has brought it to a national level. And so every MP and MPP that we're talking to right now, and I'm sure that you are, as municipal elected officials, are feeling the same type of pressure from your constituents. So if we can go to the next slide, which is our final slide, is just saying, please help us with our advocacy work. You can as well, every time when you talk to your MPs and MPPs, please bring up the GIG project. We are in this together. We can push forward as much as we can together. We still feel like we don't want to miss the 2021 building cycle. At EORN, we feel confident with our experience that we can have an RFP in place by February, this coming February. Our model is a proven model across the country. People are looking at the EORN model. We've done consultancy work for Nova Scotia. We're getting questions from British Columbia. And so overall, we feel that with everybody's support, there's a chance that there's a good chance that we can get the GIG project and hopefully still start construction next year. We don't want to waste and lose another year. And so with that, that concludes our part of the presentation. And I'm not taking questions because I probably won't know how to answer them. But no, I do if there's a straightforward question, of course. But I just wanted to say thank you for your time and support.
Thank you, Marco. Does anyone have any comments or questions that Marco might be able to answer, or that we could take back to have someone else answer that we haven't had a chance to talk about tonight? Certainly as vice chair, I can tell you, I have never worked with such a hard-working group that are so ahead of what's coming next. It's amazing, the energy and the skill. So if anybody can do this project, we can. Okay. No other questions or comments. We'll move on to our next part of our meeting tonight. Thank you all very much from EORN. Now we have joint service delivery review. Did someone have a question? No? Okay. So we have with us tonight. Okay. We have John Matheson, from the Strategy Corp team who will, and part of his team, who will be reviewing the joint service delivery model. Where is John?
I'm here, Madam Chair.
Okay, there you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and good evening, heads of council and members of council. It's a real pleasure to be here to communicate with you about this end of the assignment. As you'll recall, right at the beginning, we did interviews with all of you, and that seems like a lifetime ago now. It was just at the very beginning of the COVID crisis, and we were all just beginning to have to cope with overloaded Bell conference lines and beginnings of living through Zoom. And it really seems like an awful lot has happened since then. And indeed, an awful lot has happened since then. I'm here with my colleagues, Megan Skinner and Chris Saloom and Jamin Chin. And actually, we're part of a team of what we were counting it up earlier. So we actually had 12 people working on this project. And we were really, really pleased to be able to work with the over 80 folks from your various municipalities who participated in what was frequently not just one meeting or one interview, but workshops and follow-ups and dialogues with us. So what we're here to present to you tonight really represents a collective work that we were pleased to co-create with a lot of members of your team. And I'm quite sure that you will, each of you, see some echoes of things that you raised with us. As you know, what we're presenting tonight is our second report. Our earlier report, the current state report, was presented some months ago. And over the summer, we've been working to develop the more detailed recommendations that would be the basis of this service delivery review. And Megan, were you going to be sharing your screen and putting that up? Because it's probably...
Yes, I am. Yeah. Perfect. I will do so now.
Yeah, terrific.
John, could you speak just a little bit louder?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try and lean in a bit too.
Excellent.
Thanks. And if you ever have if I trail off or whatever, just let me know. I react well to a good prod. So by all means.
I will.
Yeah. And the other thing, just by way of mechanics, is we've been told to try and target to have you out of here by give or take 8:30. That's obviously like we're here at your pleasure. It's not the other way around. We will try and work to hit that pace. It's a 124-page report that we're going to be presenting. So we will try to move through this expeditiously, but we also want to do justice to it. So suffice it to say, we're here for you, not the other way around. And
John, would you like questions as you go through them, or would you stop at certain points to take questions?
I think quick questions of clarification that are probably going to make everybody feel better. I think if we get into lengthy debates, we'd really be at risk of not making it through the 10 different initiatives that we have to discuss. But I'm obviously in your hands, Madam Chair. Whatever you would normally do is what we would facilitate.
Okay, we'll take questions, only 1 or 2 questions on each section as we go through. And then in the end, we'll get anyone who hasn't asked a question. Does that work for everyone? Okay.
There's just a couple of other introductory comments. The fascinating thing about a review like this is it presents a real challenge, but it's also a real opportunity. The challenge is to imagine how things would be if they were not the way they are. And that means creating a lot of stuff out of whole cloth. Your officials work pretty hard, and they don't spend their time developing reports for the most part on alternative realities. And this is all about developing alternative realities. So to some degree, it's a huge privilege because you get to think about how to modernize and reduce future costs and make the best use of limited staffing. But it also requires the ability to sort of step out of yourself and be creative and innovative. And yet at the same time, we were under pretty strong instructions all the way from the time of your RFP document that what you also wanted was, yes, creative and innovative, but also realistic and practical. Because, you know, when we were doing those first interviews, we heard a lot of things. And one of the things we heard loud and clear from more than one of you was, these reports never end well. They're always pie in the sky. They never work. We're jaded. We've done too many of them. You know, it's that same old bad feeling. And so we've really tried to run a process that would overcome that. But, you know, we did hear a lot of very positives right at the start too. And look, we took those comments, you know, that they were very fair ball. And the test was on us to try and deliver something that overcame those concerns, not to just to sort of, you know, your previous presenter was EORN, and it's not our job to be EOR, it's our job to be positive. And so we took that in stride. But, you know, the focus that we heard on the achieving savings was balanced very much against maintaining service. And on balance at the beginning, we heard a lot of, on whole, it works well, but we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't try to do better. And so you guys at Strategy Corp, your job is to help us do that. Now, we also heard some push coming from you know, more of a defensive space. If we don't get in front of change now, you know, we may not like what happens when it comes rolling down the hill at us later. And again, that's fair ball, because as we heard loud and clear, there are many in your ranks who are still recovering from the last time the province imposed restructuring on you. And so, you know, this opportunity to do some service delivery change that was short of that seemed like a very strong opportunity to, you know, to be able to do the best in public administration without having a gun to your heads. We heard loud and clear that it was about getting your fair share. And, you know, one person put it quite bluntly, there's money sitting on the table, we're told. Your job is to tell us how to get it. So we've tried to respond to that. We also heard loud and clear that geography is just a fact in Frontenac, and that, you know, of the social sciences, geography is like the ace of spades compared to, you know, politics or other disciplines. And we took that on board because we understand that there's different needs and different service realities. And no matter how much we may want to harmonize things, sometimes a 2.5 hour drive from one end of the place to the other is just a lot to overcome and call it efficient. So we really took that on board. But we also took on board other things that we heard, like having 4 or 5 sets of everything can be a problem. It can be a problem for the people making the decisions. It can be a problem for the people administering them, and it can be a problem for the public who has to live under them. So we took that to heart too. And the other thing I just wanted to emphasize is there were a couple of issues, and we promised that we'd sort of address everything that you raised that was in our scope. And I did just want to acknowledge that there were a number of people on the line tonight who raised a couple of other issues that did not become part of our 10 areas for deep dives, but I just wanted to acknowledge the issues, A, because I promised that we would listen, and B, because a lot of what is being done here tonight could be seen as being enablers of progress on those things. And so while we have not necessarily made specific recommendations about them, they're kind of here in spirit, because in identifying some bigger, longer term goals that you had, you were really demonstrating, hey, if we had savings, if we were able to bend the cost curve, then we certainly know what we'd be investing it in. And whether that's on our own or whether that's collectively is for another day and not part of this report. But I did want to acknowledge that the first issue that we heard many people say is really the most important thing is the one you were talking about before you had us on, about broadband. So it's obviously still top of mind. Youth retention and the attraction of young families was something we heard a lot about. The need for different types of housing and different affordabilities of housing for different folks, and the need for economic development and tourism activities, in part to help create the sorts of jobs that are good for youth retention and young family attraction. And then also the need for a couple of specific type transit or transportation solutions. Transit was one that was raised to us a number of times. And of course, you know, the issue of the ferry, you can't talk to people from the islands without talking about the ferry, but we don't deal with that in this report because we understand it's been well considered it through other forums. But I just wanted to pay acknowledgement to those things because we don't cover them, but it wasn't that we didn't listen. It was that we see those as being things that are going to require further investments, but they may well, they're going to have to come out of the sort of savings and things that you do implement. Our hopes for this report is that we provide you with a buffet of initiatives that's actually going to take you a couple of years to get through. I would not want you to hear us as recommending that there's stuff here that you could do all at once. That's probably not what we would recommend. You know, how you decide to phase it, you know, you're the decision makers and you'll make the right choice for you about what pace to do it at. Nothing would please us more than if you said, boy, those guys at Strategy Corp weren't ambitious enough. We could do more faster. But we heard loud and clear that what you wanted was practical and reasonable and implementable given the resources that you had. And we did not consider it part of our mandate to find new and exotic ways to spend more money for you. So what you'll see is a range of initiatives that should be spread out of time, implemented, you know, as you wish at the pace that you wish. But we think that there's a lot in here that's very positive that can help fuel your deliberations for the next couple of years. Megan, can we have the next slide? And I'm going to turn it over to Jamin, and then Jamin's going to kick this off, and then we will bounce back and forth amongst ourselves. And I'm certainly prepared to tell you that we're not going to spend as much time on any other slide as we did on slide 3. So why don't you start it off, Jamin?
Thanks, John. So I'll start off by going through the first part of the executive summary, which provides a high-level overview of our findings. And then the second part of the report, which we'll spend more time on, it goes through each of the detailed initiative profiles in turn to provide some greater detail on the recommendations that John was mentioning. This slide really just summarizes the scope of our review and provides a summary of the high-level results of the study. So we were asked to look at ways to potentially improve the efficiency and effectiveness of service delivery across the Frontenacs, with a particular focus on ways in which the municipalities could employ new collaborative models to do so. The majority of the services that are provided across the Frontenacs were in scope, with the exception of social services, health and paramedic services, libraries, and long-term care. And the first part of our review, as John said, was a current state assessment of how those services function today, which included in that interim report 64 detailed service profiles, comparator benchmarking, the identification of over 150 potential improvement opportunities that could be explored further, ranging from small to substantial, and pulled from a variety of sources throughout the initial part of the engagement. And of that long list of 150 potential opportunities, we selected 10 high priority initiatives to explore further, which form the basis for this final report we're presenting to you today. So in summary, we found that these 10 initiatives that we focused on represent an estimated $1.4 million in annual operating and capital cost savings or avoidance, and productivity savings worth over $500,000 in staff effort that can be reallocated to higher priority tasks. In addition, we identified fairly substantial revenue opportunities on the order of $1 million in potential infrastructure grants, which we'll speak to in more detail on the roads initiative. And the opportunities we looked at, which we will focus on the details of, included operational improvements to back office functions, a series of coordinated approaches to service delivery across municipal infrastructure, and an improved approach to planning and leveraging IT investments to improve the way the Frontenacs do business. So all told, this is a fairly substantial opportunity, obviously, but I'll add one important caveat before we get into the rest of the report that will be important to keep in mind, and that's that we were, as is pretty common in these types of reviews, limited in some instances by the availability of data. So we relied on a number of sources, including the internal operational and financial data that was available to us, as well as external research and benchmarks and our experience in other municipalities. But where there were gaps in available information, we also relied on direct estimates and assumptions that were developed and validated with staff. And so there are a couple of follow-ons to that. The first is that our approach was to assume the most conservative approach to the estimation of savings that we felt we could in any areas where the data was imprecise. So the result is that it's likely that in a number of the instances, we've actually underestimated the scale of potential savings available, but that we're confident we provided you with a floor rather than a ceiling on the scale of the potential improvements that could be achieved. The second is that you'll notice in some portions of the report, there are variances across the municipalities in terms of the estimated savings that might be driven in part different estimates of the time and cost breakdown in certain activities across the municipalities. So ultimately, our intent with the recommendations and the scale of the benefits that we've quantified is to provide you with the confidence in the scale of opportunity in front of you, while also providing a large margin of safety that accounts for that sort of lack of data in certain areas in implementing the recommendations. Next slide. So there are a number of themes, and John spoke to some of them already, that emerge from our review and our engagement with staff and stakeholders that are useful to highlight as critical context and inputs into our recommendations and how we arrived at them. We found in general a very broad willingness and enthusiasm for collaboration across the municipalities, which is a great foundation to build on. But it's tempered by a few critical factors that we tried to keep in mind. The first is the wide variation in the characteristics across each of the municipalities. You've all got very different scales of financial and operational capacity, populations, geography, and the current service delivery models you employ, which can create a challenge in pursuing joint service delivery, both operationally, but also because equity is a core concern for any new shared service opportunity. There's a desire to pursue opportunities that are right for us, but they have to be make sense on a case-by-case win-win basis. And so this is a key factor in aligning on what models to ultimately recommend in any given service area and the areas where joint delivery or greater collaboration are actually feasible. There are also a number of barriers that we work to overcome or address or consider in the development of our recommendations, which included the way in which communication and coordination is done today, which is often on an ad hoc basis without a clearly defined process or structure to support that sort of consistent decision-making outside of and across councils. And so while there's an openness to collaboration with limited staff capacity to take this on, collaboration today is largely a function of interpersonal effort. There's also legacy structures from the pre-amalgamation area, which are limiting the efficiency and effectiveness of operations across municipalities. And while there are substantial digitization opportunities that we identified through our review, a lot of that is constrained by infrastructure, which, particularly the lack of high speed and broadband access limits the ability to capture those opportunities today. So within our review, we tried to identify opportunities and recommendations that would, take those themes into consideration and help to address some of them. And I'll let John speak a little bit about how we think about collaboration and evaluating different types of opportunities.
There's two main points, thanks, Jamin, on this slide. The first is on the left side, you see we've got a stack of boxes. And on the top is the priorities that are set by council. And on the bottom is the current financial resources available to do what you're doing. And in our work with your teams, we said, look, that's council's domain. Let's please hold those as a constant. We don't want to wish away our problems with magic money or to say, well, what if that wasn't as important, or what if there was a different standard? So what we instead favor trying to work with is hold those two things as a constant and say, look, given the assets that we have, they are what they are. In some cases, they're in great shape, smooth as a road in North Frontenac. In other cases, they're not. In some cases, we've got policies that are harmonized. In some cases, they're not. In some cases, we've got processes that have already gone through Six Sigma. In some cases, not so much. In some cases, we've got fully staffed teams and effective long-term plans for maintaining teams. In other cases, not so much. And then a lot of services are really heavily reliant on equipment. So we took a look at those opportunity areas as being the primary levers that we could pull. And then the second thing that we do is we take a look at just the spectrum of collaboration. And when we talk about collaboration, what we typically mean is, well, look, you totally maintain your own sense of identity on this, but you just do more together. As you move up, kind of like a rheostat, slowly turning it up, you get into the more active sharing of services. And on the upper end, you get into full integration. And there's lots of different ways to achieve that. So those are the main concepts that we were working with your team. And if you jump to the next slide, Megan, on this one, we sort of set out the fact that the scorecard that we applied contained at least these 6 different things that we were working with. You know, the potential of a model to actually deliver cost savings and the materiality of the savings, as Jamin is fond of saying, is the orange worth the squeeze? And so like in some cases, you could do a lot of effort and not get much for it. In other cases, it's, you know, what they would call low-hanging fruit. The capacity to deliver or create the need to new capacity via in-house or contracted services. So, you know, doability matters. The ability of a model to continue to meet local service responsibilities and expectations and deliver on customer satisfaction. We heard again and again and again, we're not interested in doing it if it means that our road doesn't get plowed until, you know, something that wouldn't meet standard. So we were very mindful of that. The ability of a model to deliver appropriate accountability and policy leadership without an undue burden on elected leaders or senior management. And this is quite important. You know, as it is, you're going to be on this meeting till 8:30. We don't want to proliferate the number of committees that say, oh, well, we'll just have a couple more committee meetings for council. They won't mind. It is like decision-making capacity is an asset of the municipality that needs to be considered, and so too senior management or management. You need to have regard to that. The effect of a model on the existing workforce, including volunteers, is also very important. You know, we really recognize the significance of volunteers, particularly in fire, and that they need to have appropriate respect paid to them in everything that you would do in order to, you know, maintain the viability of that service, which is so important to your communities. And then, you know, we've already made mention to the geographic realities and challenges. And so those were the lenses that we would look at as we were looking at things. And if we can jump to the next slide, this is the last of these kind of conceptual ones. And the important point about this one is this is our other rheostat, which is, you know, when we talked about how you can move up the line through collaboration to integration, there's lots of different tools. And we look very much, you know, oftentimes right now you're doing it simply, it's locally controlled and it is done where it's done, and where there is collaboration, it's ad hoc. And, you know, a lot of people might say, well, that's worked since Confederation. You know, what's wrong with continuing that? There's also, you have living, breathing examples of 2 or more municipalities collaborating in a bilateral shared arrangement. You could do it so that one municipality provides services to some or all of the Frontenac municipalities pursuant to either a contribution agreement or a service agreement or a memorandum of understanding, and that could include the county on that basis as one of the municipalities. Similarly, you could also just do something through the county, in which case it would be different. You could tell it would be different because it might be funded through the levy in that case, as opposed to through a service level agreement or something. Another possibility is you can use municipal services corporations to provide service, and it is important in your case, given the proliferation of capable neighbors and your sort of very long, skinny, rectangular geography, is getting services from municipalities outside of Frontenac. And we considered all of these things, and you can see that we've made some observations about them. But over the course of the report, you'll see that we explore the fit of each of these approaches to different solutions. Shane? And next slide, please, Megan.
So when we evaluated the potential financial impact of the various opportunities, we grouped them into 3 buckets. The first is new revenues. So are there opportunities to generate revenues through cost recovery or other sources? The second are what we term as dark green savings or direct savings, which create tangible bottom line reductions for reinvestment and are based around, you know, the defined actions that will impact the very specific costs associated with the service. And the third are the light green or productivity savings, which include actions or initiatives that improve productivity or the output or quality of a service, which result in intangible cost avoidances. So getting more or the same for less effort and input. So the net is all of these savings gives us a range of potential benefits that can be used by the municipalities to reinvest in areas and or free up staff time to focus on higher value or more strategic work. And we break down the potential benefits for each initiative and across their impact across these 3 categories.
It's probably really important to stress here, you know, with the upward pressures on municipal costs, and with the downward pressures on provincial transfers, we wouldn't want anybody to think either that you can achieve all of this in 1 year. We also wouldn't want anybody to think that that the things that you have here are going to lead to savings in the sense of tax reductions. That's not so much, there's actually a couple of things that might be big enough that might influence that on the capital side. But even then, given your backlogs in capital and the burdens of maintaining an up-to-date asset management plan, I mean, the materiality of what we're finding here is much more about bending the curve down of, having to have tax increases than it is about, offering, big opportunities for reductions. But, that's just an important context, because in no sense did we find that, we were coming in to judge and say, oh, I'm shocked to learn that this wasn't done in the past, or that kind of thing. I mean, what you're really pointing to in everything that follows is opportunities that are crystallizing now because of this really positive attitude towards collaboration that that each of you through your councils has embraced by through doing things like this review and the ongoing efforts of your team. So we don't want to oversell the opportunity here, but as you can see, the numbers are material. Okay.
So this table really just summarizes each of the initiatives that we'll be walking through in more detail for the rest of the presentation and their associated benefits at a high level. And so I won't go into too much detail about each one in turn, but we start by looking at roads and bridges, which is focused on two key elements: a process for greater collaboration on capital projects and coordination of operations, and an approach to government relations to close the identified disparity in provincial grants that has been given a lot of attention. And so we identified both revenue opportunity from the grants associated with this, as well as dark green savings from more collaborative approaches to conducting roads and bridges maintenance. On the fire services, we looked at varying levels of coordination of fire services on a municipality by municipality basis, and our recommendations range from collaboration as substantial as the integration of two services to things like greater cross municipal support for training. And so there are significant recurring cost savings associated with our review of fire services, as well as one-off direct cost savings and productivity gains associated with that. On waste management, we explored an intermunicipal governance body to coordinate strategy and operations and address upcoming policy changes, and found both direct and productivity savings associated with that approach. Building and septic services focused on looking at a regional approach to coordinating building and septic inspections, including Part 8 inspections, and to improve customer experience and achieve operational improvements. And we've identified indefinite benefits here due to the longer term nature of some of these recommendations and really what it sets you up to do in the future. As Part 8 inspections become more of a mature service in how they're delivered, and as the coordination of these services continues to grow. Our review of bylaw services looked at coordinating opportunities to improve service level and achieve greater value for money by coordinating an approach to bylaw enforcement that includes looking at joint enforcement contract and also use of administrative penalties to improve productivity and potentially recover greater costs over time. On procurement, we investigated how a collaborative procurement facilitated through a shared procurement function could reduce the category costs and risks associated with procuring common items. And so we established a range of savings based on category unit cost reductions. Our look at integrated digital strategy is really focused on continuing down the path that you've already started towards, looking at creating a common integrated approach to planning, procurement, and implementation of new digital solutions over time. And so based on the estimate of a single use case, we found both dark green and productivity savings that should increase over time as this process continues to mature. Policy and process harmonization and development services looked at policy tools and operational changes that could yield efficiencies by improving delivery against outcomes and reducing the staff time required to achieve them. And so we found fairly substantial productivity savings associated with a couple of options that we looked at. Coordination of legal services is about an approach to sharing legal services coordinator that would be responsible for coordinating the contracting of legal services and improving the efficiency and reducing total legal costs. And then finally, the last initiative that we'll go into is human resources coordination, which looked at standardizing policies and practices and the opportunities for outsourcing and the potential pooling of benefits, which results in potentially both productivity and direct cost savings. Next slide. So like John said, it's important to note that what we're recommending here is a large package of reforms, and that the implementation and realization of these savings can be expected to be to grow over time. So we grouped the initiatives into 3 time horizons of implementation based on our assessment of the potential to yield savings versus the effort required, the need and ability to prioritize effort for these projects, and whether there are other factors like risks that make the initiatives more or less urgent. And so in the short term, the things that fall into that bucket include the collaborative procurement initiative, coordinating bylaw services, enhanced collaboration on roads and bridges, fire services, coordinating building and septic services, and coordination of legal services. The medium-term initiatives include, continuing work on both the short-term initiatives as well as work on the policy and process harmonization for development services and waste management. And then in the longer term, we bucketed human resources coordination and integrated digital strategy. And if you go into the next slide, really what this shows you is that we don't expect that all of these will be implemented at the same time, and we don't expect that the savings that we've articulated so far associated with them will be realized at the same time. You can see that in the short term, there's some direct cost savings to be had associated with the timeline to implementation and the initiatives that we recommended that you prioritize, with revenue and productivity increases continuing to grow over time up until 2026. And so it's a fairly savings can be realized in the short term, but will increase over time as these initiatives are implemented. And none of this is necessarily set in stone. So it is highly dependent upon what you want to prioritize when and what you do or do not decide to move forward with, but was based on our understanding of the realities and constraints today, a reasonable estimate of how we thought the savings could accrue over time. So if we go to slide 22, we're now going to get into each of the initiatives and describe them in more detail. We bucketed them into 2 categories. The first is resident facing, so those services that directly provided to residents, and the second are back office, so improvements to the internal functions of the municipalities themselves. One thing that I'll note before we jump into the resident facing services, one component of our review was resident engagement to survey priorities for service improvements. And so the resident facing services each contain a high level summary of what we heard from survey respondents and are prioritized in the order that residents indicated they were concerned or sought improvements of those services in. So before we jump into that, this might be a time to make any clarifying questions because we'll now spend each of the next few discussions focus on a specific initiative.
Okay, let's do that. Now I can't see everyone, so if you could say your name and then ask your question, we'll do it that way. Or a comment.
It's Ron Higgins here. John, you sort of touched on why amalgamation wasn't discussed. And I know that was one of my my only input was looking at a single tier to look at cost savings and implementing everything you're talking about here. Could you explain why amalgamation, reviewing that or going to a single tier municipality isn't on the table?
Well, yeah, and we had a great conversation about that. It really was not in our terms of reference right from the point at which we were hired. So if you look, and not to be legalistic about it, but the one thing we're pretty careful about is doing what we're told. We were to stay color within the lines of working within the existing governance structures. So that's why we didn't wind up reporting on it. But I think, you know, to the degree that there's stuff in here that speaks about the benefits of greater harmonization or coordination, it's ammunition for conversations, but we weren't supposed to get into that because we were supposed to really focus on things that could be readily implemented. So we've tried to address.
Okay, I won't tie. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I won't tie up the discussion on that any further because it looks like this is something I'll have to have a discussion with the other townships in the county as we go through on the implementation. But to me, it's a great tool to implement everything that you have here, especially on the table that the current state slide. Everything on that slide could be addressed by amalgamating, going into single tool versus trying to coordinate activities between each of the townships. We never seem to agree on something, and some townships will implement something in concert with one or two others, and the other ones, no, I don't want part of that. So I see this, if we don't look at, and I'll have to discuss with county, I guess, on this one, is if we don't look at going single tier, we could be in the same issue that we've been in years where we're going to have discussions over and over again on how to implement these services, how to collaborate. There's too many differences of opinion to do this effectively in my mind. So I'll take this as part of the implementation. We'll have a discussion with my own council in the county and the rest of the townships going forward on that aspect of it. So thank you.
Okay, anything else? I don't hear too many people yelling, so let's continue on and save our comments for the end.
Great. So the first initiative, as I mentioned, that we'll look at is enhanced collaboration on roads and bridges. And so this was selected not only because it's a significant and growing cost to all of the municipalities in the Frontenacs, and because it was a priority for resident survey, but also because Frontenac, as we understand it, faces some relatively unique challenges in this regard. Much of that driven by the fact that I understand is a well-worn subject now, that there is no county role in road maintenance and no regional roads network, which creates two unique situations. The first is that there's no existing process or governance structure to share in the investment and maintenance of roads across the county. And as a result, most of the areas of collaboration are driven on an ad hoc basis through the efforts of the public works managers, which we have noted some substantial successes in the past through the good working relationships that they have with one another, but are also constrained by the availability of information. And as noted upfront, the lack of time and capacity that staff have to actually focus on identifying those opportunities. The second is the situation with respect to provincial grant funding, with the lack of a regional roads network leading to the Frontenacs receiving a lower amount of funding than should be reasonably expected, to the tune of $81 per lane kilometer as estimated by KPMG. So we understand that a lot of the opportunities associated with the regional roads network are already have been worked on and are being worked on by KPMG, and the concept is being studied in a greater detail. And so our goal wasn't to retread over the issues that were already scoped into another project, but to find areas where collaboration could be enhanced to provide additional value for us to identify operational opportunities and to bring, into stark focus some of the things that could be done to remedy some of the issues that exist today. All told are three recommendations. The first, to establish a formal governance structure to facilitate greater collaboration. The second, to develop a renewed approach to intergovernmental relations with respect to grants. And then looking at a specific opportunity that we identified for the sharing of in-house winter control services. We're estimating a total revenue opportunity of $1 million associated with additional grants that could be received, and an annual cost savings operationally of just under $500,000 a year. Now, I will say that in terms of the revenue estimate, the $1 million is really a very conservative estimate based on the KPMG report that looked at peer municipalities and neighboring municipalities in terms of what the deficit is versus those comparators. I believe that the total estimate was over $3 million a year. And so we try to be conservative in estimating, if you were only partially successful at closing that gap, what might the revenue opportunity be? And so we've selected $1 million as our estimate. But as I mentioned, as is our approach in all of these cases, considerable upside to the opportunity there. So if you go to the next slide. Really, this slide just replays the framework that John provided a voiceover for up front and indicates where we saw some of the opportunities to push the Frontenac municipalities up that spectrum of collaboration across a number of the different areas related to roads and which our recommendations are intended to facilitate. So there's specific areas of joint collaboration across software, procurement, use of equipment, and capital construction. And there are significant cost reductions that we believe can be captured just by finding ways to improve collaboration and some specific sharing of services and assets. There's also, as I noted up front, a specific opportunity to integrate operations, and those can be evaluated on a case-by-case basis over time. And we'll get into more details about what that might look like in the next couple of slides here as well. So really just to highlight plenty of opportunities to achieve pretty substantial benefits just by operating on sort of the collaboration end of the spectrum. So as I mentioned, there's 3 recommendations that we're exploring in this section of the report. They kind of fall into 2 buckets. The first is a process and a structure that can facilitate joint decision-making that enables you to capture both short-term operational improvements and sort of longer-term, bigger ticket items through better shared planning. We look at one example about how better joint planning around capital investment can yield significant cost avoidance through project bundling. We'll also specifically look at winter control as one immediate opportunity that was sourced through engagement with the public works staff as indicative of the type of thing that you can source through better collaboration and a formal working group. The second is looking at that revised government relations strategy that works at overcoming the challenges associated with the Frontenac's grant funding environment that can address the deficit in funding versus comparators.
And I can just jump in on that one. We're both mindful of and respectful of the past efforts that you guys have made to draw to the attention of the province that, it's just irrational what your current funding levels are. But Michael, Fenn, and I are both in agreement. And you don't necessarily know me very well, but the messing with the province is kind of what I do in regard to this. And I think you have an extraordinarily strong case in 2020 that you might not have had in previous years because of the particular alignment and orientation of the government. The fact that you now have 2 government-funded studies that both say this is completely irrational. The fact that you have a government that would be mortified, just as you would be mortified at the idea of creating a sham county roads department solely for the purposes of accessing funding, they would be mortified if you did that too. And I think a robust government relations strategy on this would be an extremely affordable luxury compared to getting you the level of funding that you have deserved. And I'd be happy to discuss this offline at greater length, but it's not that we think you haven't tried. It's that we think you've got a particular window right now that makes success more likely. And I wouldn't let previous efforts be a predictor of future success in something like this. But happy to discuss that at greater length in due course.
Next slide. So really the first recommendation is just to formalize an intermunicipal collaboration forum in the form of a public works managers committee whose mandate it will be to specifically look at areas to enhance collaboration and joint procurement on projects. Its goal and how we quantified the benefits associated with this would be to capture a associated cost reductions with capital project bundling, as well as facilitate decision-making and opportunity identification over time. Not just related to roads and bridges, which was the focus of this initiative, but also because of the structure would enable the public works managers to address other areas within the public works portfolio, like waste management, which we'll speak to in later on in the presentation. So I won't go into too many of the details here about what the process actually looked like, but the goal would be first to stand up this committee and then to institute a process that enables capital budgeting on an annual basis to be aligned, and for the municipalities to go to market together to procure for capital project completions on a bundled basis. And if you go to the next slide, the opportunities here are pretty substantial. This has been had a spotlight shone on it by a number of organizations and a number of case studies. The Ontario Good Roads Association and MTO both conducted studies on what bundling and the benefits associated with it could look like. And the MTO found that municipalities could save between 13 to 20% on budgets on bridges and culverts using a bundled approach. It's also commonly used south of the border. So there are a number of case studies where bundling has reduced the cost of capital investment and capital construction by very substantial amounts. And so the first sort of order opportunity associated with getting a public works managers committee together is to look at capturing some of the benefits associated with bundling projects and reducing the costs and increasing the speed of delivery of those projects in the near term. Next slide.
And I think we discussed this.
Yeah, I'll spare retreading what John went over. The next slide is another specific case where, bringing the public works managers together identified a specific area where there might be a chance for integration. And I think this case is indicative of the type of opportunity that could be uncovered through a formalized forum for that kind of information sharing, where one municipality is looking at a shift in its delivery model. So in this case, South Frontenac is looking at the business case to bring more of the services associated with overnight winter control in-house as a way of reducing costs. And when that opportunity was surfaced, there's the potential for Central and North Frontenac to also look at sharing the costs associated with that and adopting an integrated service model. Doesn't involve a change to a service that isn't already being considered. It's sort of latching on to an opportunity that one municipality is considering, and that might make sense or even greater sense if considered by all the municipalities in turn. And so we were able, by looking at the potential to reduce overtime costs through better utilization of resources associated with this and joint investment in the service, to make a pretty substantial argument that it makes sense to look at a joint service delivery model for something like this. And it's really just indicative of the types of things that can be surfaced just through better information sharing and sort of a formal approach to evaluating those opportunities. So I will turn it over to Chris, who can walk through FIRE.
Perfect. Before we get started, do we want to pause for questions on?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Do we have any questions or comments? Okay.
So I'll move forward with FIRE.
Someone has their hands up before question. I guess they'll wait till the end.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Madam Chair, you're just breaking up a bit for me. I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'll move.
Okay, let's continue.
Okay, perfect. So the goal of FIRE and what we really took from all the council interviews is that we want to celebrate the volunteer firefighters across the municipalities. Obviously, the men and women who are dedicating their nights and weekends to the service is something that should be respected. So we also want to look at how can we improve service levels across the municipalities to support the different challenges facing all the Frontenac fire services. So what we really uncovered in this initiative is that the road forward would have to be a municipality by municipality approach to fire services that's based on where the municipalities are in their thinking, the opportunities that they have in their unique services, and lastly, the geography especially for Frontenac and the islands. So all the examples that we have used in this initiative are drawn upon by other municipalities that have volunteer fire services. It's one thing that we wanted to make sure is that we are comparing apples to apples here, into making sure that the ideas that we're bringing forward are used in the municipal context in Ontario, and that they've been used successfully with volunteer fire services. So there's two different aspects that I'll dive deeper into. We believe that South Frontenac and Central Frontenac has a unique opportunity right now, just because of staff vacancies, to explore voluntarily integrating their fire services to both improve service levels and reduce costs. So I'll dive deeper into them in the following slides. But for the other municipalities, as North Frontenac, you have completed your own 2019 study on different fire models. We wanted to respect, obviously, the decision that came out of that study. So we're moving down the spectrum of collaboration on the top hand side for Frontenac and North Frontenac, and we're suggesting exploring an automatic aid agreement with South Central Services to improve service levels. And for both North, Central, South, and the islands, we explore looking at the Lennox and Addington model of integrated fire training model that rotates across the municipalities to support the burden of fire training across all the municipalities to improve the productivity of the full-time fire staff. And lastly, looking at if inspections and investigations could become a shared service that is offered to North and the islands. As we heard, doing those parts of the fire service is a bit of a challenge. And if South Central is expanding their service levels, there might be ability for a cost recovery shared service agreement there. So Megan, if you want to jump to the next slide, that'd be great. In the following slide, this just goes over high-level structure. So I'm going to explore the South and Central first, and then we can go into North and the islands. So we are recommending a voluntary service integration for South and Central. We see that could be many different types of benefits that this voluntary service integration could yield. The first is staffing. So as you can see from the next slide, which has our org chart, there would be improvements, both, Megan, if you go back, I'm sorry, improvements, both the deputies' positions will have specific areas of focus. One will be on fire prevention, one will be on training. We have built in a model, an administrative assistant to support the administrative function and integration of the services, as well as by having two deputies in charge of two different areas of the service levels. We have more specialization and focus on those types of services. The second area of improvement we see here is a facility rationalization. So as we understand it, there is a desire to do upcoming fire station studies. We say we are recommending to do this together and just seeing if there could be specific areas, services, specific stations that could be offloaded because of a centralized and amalgamated service. Thirdly, fleet, another area of tremendous cost savings, especially for Central Frontenac. We understand that Central has to acquire 3 new pumpers that ranges from $500,000 to $1 million per pumper. And in conversations with both Central and South, if amalgamated and integrated, the need for Central to buy 3 pumpers would drop down to 2, so saving $500,000. And lastly, improving services. So in conversations with the fire chiefs, both from Central and South, this would allow for increased service levels, especially on fire inspections, education campaigns, smoke alarm programs, code enforcement, the improved training elements that we will get into a bit later. So Megan, if you can get me to the org chart, that'd be greatly appreciated. So this was really built off of the North Elmsley and Tay Valley model. As you may be aware, those two municipalities have an integrated fire service. So from a governance perspective, what they've been using successfully is a joint fire service board. So this has equal representation from both their councils. So using that model, we're suggesting that Central and South could create a joint fire service board with 3 representatives of council for both communities. Secondly, there would be 1 joint fire chief and director of emergency services. This person would oversee the services for both South and Central. This person would have 2 deputies. And the way that North Elmsley and Drummond, North Elmsley and Tay Valley have set it up, their deputies are responsible for 1 municipality. And in addition, we suggest that their deputies be responsible for either training or fire inspections and investigations. And lastly, to support increased service levels, we have calculated in our estimations here, the hiring of an administrative assistant support not only the deputy chiefs and the fire chief and the service board, but also the volunteers. So having that person to complete more administrative functions, so the higher paid and more specialized staff can focus on what you really hired them to do. So that's really how we would create the organizational structure. The big focus here is to have both deputy chiefs responsible for their municipal areas, so that the impact on the day-to-day volunteer is less felt, because they'll be still reporting into someone who is responsible for Central and someone who's responsible for South. Megan, if you can get me to the next slide. So again, as I mentioned at the top, we looked at jurisdictional examples that had volunteer firefighters to make sure that these are based in the same realities that South and Central are based on. So we have, as I mentioned a lot, Tay Valley and Drummond, North Elmsley, but Georgian Bluff has a similar structure with Meaford as well. Megan, next slide. So this is the cost benefit analysis for both communities. It walks it through in a high level. Again, one of the largest savings would be for Central Frontenac for not having to acquire 1 pumper unit. Obviously, the 2 services would work on a joint asset management plan and both be responsible for the contributions to that. Next slide, Megan. Following slide. So for North Frontenac, as I mentioned, we wanted to respect, obviously, the council decision from the 2019 report that looked at fire. So the areas that we saw here that could be a benefit was to explore an automatic aid agreement with the Central and South Service for more service level center improvements, standardizing training coordination between the Frontenac communities. So in talks with Lennox and Addington, what they have done successfully is create a training body with all the fire chiefs of all the area municipalities, where they have taken responsibility for a portion of training of all new candidates. And lastly, for North, looking at if South Central could do inspections on a cost recovery basis. Next slide, Megan. And then Frontenac and the islands, the big part here is the geographical limitations. So here we're talking about investigations is something that we heard as a challenge for Frontenac Island, especially as a smaller staff footprint. So having South Central support them in that way with the improved staffing capabilities through integration and the training coordination that we talked about in North. Any questions about that?
Yes, I do have one. It's
Ron.
Ron Higgins here. One question: when you were doing North Frontenac, did you find out that we have 2 fire services here, one for North Frontenac and one for the Lennox, or sorry, the Addington Highlands?
Yeah, so we talked to both fire chiefs.
Okay,
They were involved in the
okay,
workshops and we had individual interviews.
thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next area. So waste management, what we wanted to really focus on, and Megan, we can go to the high level overview, is really working on the Cambian report. And what the major finding there was that each individual service is doing well, but there are larger policy and regulatory changes that are upcoming, and that these are very difficult for small rural municipalities to overcome together. So using the same body that was talked about in roads, the public works table, we would like to use that as an area so that the municipalities, the Frontenac municipalities, can standardize different operational services, hauling, transfer, disposal of solid waste, and recycling, and also come up with joint approaches to policies, especially as extended producers' responsibility is on the horizon. Obviously, that's a provincial piece of legislation that isn't fully developed yet, but will have ramifications for all of Ontario's 444 municipalities. So this body would help on the operational quick win aspects of waste services that can be better coordinated, and then work together to address these larger policy and regulatory issues. Megan, I'll get you to jump to the current issues that we saw. So again, what we heard from the waste services in the Frontenac municipalities was that there isn't a willingness to work together. However, there hasn't been an established formal approach to do so. One thing we took in from the different waste interviews and the interviews with council is the threat that the extended producers' responsibilities legislation will have on blue box costs, and how can the Frontenac municipalities approach this together. Another area of concern is public education and waste diversion, that if standardized policies and procedures were developed here across the Frontenac municipalities, compliance to both waste diversion and the different aspects of waste management would be probably yield more results. And lastly, if there were abilities of the Frontenac municipalities to work collaboratively on data and understanding the actual tonnage that is going into the waste streams, there would be more ability for the different services to create a coordinated approach and strategy to make sure that they increase the lifespan of their different assets. So we can jump ahead, Megan. So what we wanted to look at here and really highlight is that while there are the strategic elements of coordinating waste strategies, there would be improvements on the operational front. So 3 basic areas that could be coordinated to yield savings would be on grinding. All the 3 communities, we found it difficult to include Frontenac Islands in some of these short win, quick win operational ideas because of the geographical limitation, but the communities could coordinate third-party grinding services, and this could yield savings. Again, this could be done at the table. Compacting, Central Frontenac has contracts to service Well North, it's a mobile compactor. North could share with Central, so you're looking at the ways to collaborate there. And recyclable hauling. If North and Central had the same location for recyclables hauling, there could both be improvements to staff productivity, but there could also be savings. So what we really wanted to highlight is that by just getting together in one workshop and testing and probing the staff, we were able to identify 3 quick win opportunities that could yield savings and productivity gains for waste services. So again, this body would allow not only for the identification of operational improvements, but allow for alignment on strategic questions that are concerning for all the Frontenac waste services. We can probably jump into the next initiative. So it's me again on this one. So what we wanted to do with building and septic services was look at Part 8 inspection as not a threat, but as an opportunity for the Frontenac municipalities to better coordinate these services, especially as COVID-19 sees more urban Ontarians look at their cottage properties as potentially full-time properties. Building and septic services will likely become a more demanded service across all Frontenac municipalities. So we use the Part 8 septic inspection as a catalyst to look at coordinating services. We understand that South has their own plan to address this change in service. So, but we would like to, in conversation with staff, they've identified that they would like to potentially look at exploring a regional approach to service building and septic services as well. So what we did is, I'll go to the org chart, Megan. We're suggesting that using Part 8 septic inspections as a catalyst, the North Central and the islands could increase service levels, especially along increased staffing levels to ensure that the productivity of the service can increase. So looking at Lambton and Dufferin, who both have a regional service model across all their municipalities, there would be a regional building chief. We would suggest in the near term having using the existing staff footprint and the other existing chief building officer, but we'd be able to, with the new revenues of Septic 8, hire 2 more additional building and septic inspectors, as well as an administrative support staff to coordinate the permits and the better utilization of staff. In this model, we also suggest that all staff, all building and septic inspectors are able to do both building and septic inspections to make sure that the actual day-to-day operations is more efficient. And we can plan the route, create better route optimization through having everyone trained across all the functions of the service. One thing we are suggesting is for Frontenac Islands is to move, no longer use their consultant services, but actually would use that the expenses that they would have used on consulting services to help fund this service. Obviously, this is a revenue neutral service, so all of the Septic 8 inspection revenues would have to be revenue neutral. One thing I'd like to mention too is South Frontenac has a plan, their own plan for Septic 8 inspections, but this does not prevent them from moving towards this regional model. If we go to the next slide, Dufferin and Lambton both have a regional model. And it will be up to the municipalities to determine the governance model that best suits their needs. We have 3 options here. Dufferin and Lambton all use a county provider, so it's run out of the county. Obviously, this would be a new service area for the county. The second option, which was talked about at Mathis when John was talking about the different service delivery models, is an intermunicipal board. And the last one would be one municipality be the service provider for the participating municipalities. So this is, again, just a financial analysis, and it has to be a cost neutral service. And we see benefits. I can talk about the benefits, but lastly, the benefits to the resident is one thing I'd like to hit on. This would be a one window approach for both septic and building services. So it would be a much more coordinated and easier approach for residents to have access to these services. We're just trying to be mindful of time. So we'll jump to the next initiative. Megan?
Is everyone still okay? We're still prepared to go on till 8:30?
Got 1 thumbs up.
long as we agree to finish at that time, Fran.
Don, do you think we will finish by 8:30?
We're certainly accelerating and the remaining content isn't quite as challenging. So we're trying to fit inside that envelope, Madam Chair. It's
Okay, very good.
It's a little tight,
let's keep
but
going.
we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, I heard you loud and clear, so I will make mine at a high level and certainly leave enough time for questions at the end of the full presentation. So for coordinating bylaw services, during the current state assessment, the Frontenac identified common challenges with the existing enforcement services provided by the Frontenac Municipal Law Enforcement, and those are outlined on slide 68. Some of these challenges may be a result of the contracts becoming outdated, so that the provisions within the contract may not be meeting service level expectations, or service level expectations may not be clearly articulated because they haven't been assessed in quite some time, which makes this review all the more timely. Conversely, it's widely recognized across the Frontenacs of the importance of effective bylaw enforcement to driving regional growth objectives, and a coordinated approach improves the customer service experience for all residents. So what this initiative did is it explored the benefits of the Frontenac municipalities coordinating the delivery of bylaw enforcement services, and the quantifiable benefits that you see on this slide included saved staff time as a result of reduced administrative burden, which is one of the biggest challenges currently facing the Frontenacs in administering their bylaw enforcement services with their current contracts. So what this initiative does is it proposes a phased approach to coordinating bylaw enforcement services so that the Frontenac municipalities can continually assess whether the services are meeting their service level expectations. They can conduct a cost-benefit analysis regarding whether the Frontenacs are moving towards cost recovery, because as you'll see on slide 68, that's one of the challenges is they're not recovering current costs for services, and whether or not they're meeting the changing expectations and demands of a changing demographic, which our current state assessment identified as one of the biggest drivers for looking at opportunities to improve service delivery across all the high priority areas. So some key features of this initiative includes moving to one contract for enforcement services. So this could be by renegotiating a new contract with the Frontenac Municipal Law Enforcement with improved service areas and contract provisions as outlined on the slide here, as well as moving towards using AMPS, the Administrative Monetary Penalty System, to adjudicate bylaw infractions in-house by scheduling hearings through a screening and hearings officer rather than having to go to court to settle a dispute if an offender were to appeal a charge. So this screening and hearings officer can be a municipally appointed employee or someone who is contracted, like the City of Kitchener contracts this person, who comes in on a monthly basis. This is just an overview of how AMPS would work to try to streamline the adjudication process, as well as its potential to yield significant cost savings by no longer having to take an appealed dispute to court. So some of the cost reductions come in the form of staff time, because it is there's a lot of administrative burden and staff time associated with preparing paperwork for court briefs, external legal fees for legal counsel and advice, and then as well as invoices from Frontenac Municipal Law Enforcement for the time taken to prepare for these court appearances. So again, this is just an overview of recommended option number 2, which is utilizing the same model, which is entering into a joint contract, but rather going to market through an RFP for an alternative service provider while still using AMPS. So some of the jurisdictional examples on the right-hand side of the slide include some alternate service providers. So the Canadian Corp of Commissioners, as well as utilizing private contracted services, which typically include people who used to work in the municipal judicial system, bylaw enforcement officers, or retired police officers. So applying the same benchmarks of savings, we believe, we believe that the Frontenacs could yield anywhere between 5 to 15% in cost reductions by going to market for a new RFP together as a joint contract. So just one more note is that over time, by coordinating by law enforcement services in conversations with staff and senior leadership, we believe that the Frontenac municipalities can improve service levels with a goal of taking a proactive, data-driven approach to by law enforcement and work towards cost recovery. It will also support the Frontenac's regional growth objectives and improve the customer experience by harmonizing bylaws wherever possible. So just in the interest of time, I will move on to the next initiative, and this is me again, lucky you. So when we looked at opportunities for collaborative procurement from all our consultation with staff and experiences with other municipalities in benchmarking research, it was identified that best practice in municipal procurement across the broader public sector in Ontario has demonstrated the effectiveness of collaborative purchasing in yielding cost savings on commonly purchased commodities and services, which are outlined in the chart in the coming slides. However, procurement tends to be a disjointed process within municipalities, with department heads and treasury responsible for various components of the procurement process. So this makes identifying and operationalizing opportunities for collaborative procurement difficult. And this is echoed by staff and leadership across the Frontenacs who recognize the benefits of collaborative purchasing, including economies of scale, cost savings, and attracting competitive bidders. But they also identify that they do not have consistently have the time or the resources to take advantage of these benefits. So these are just some jurisdictional examples of other municipalities that have endeavored to improve their collaborative purchasing by either using cooperative purchasing groups or cooperative purchasing organizations such as OECM and the Association of Municipal Authority Service. So really what this initiative demonstrates is the range of potential cost savings through collaborative purchasing of commonly purchased goods and services and the role of a shared procurement specialist in driving those savings. So based on the experiences of comparable upper and lower tier municipalities across Ontario, we applied a 5 to 15% savings range on categories of goods and services that you see here on this slide. And the savings are based on the 2019 spend of the Frontenacs. However, it is important to note that each municipality's cost data may not be included in each cost category, as these goods or services may not be currently purchased or may be captured in a different cost category or budget. So while these savings are estimates, they are indicative of the magnitude of the potential cost savings for reinvestment should the Frontenac municipalities consistently engage in opportunities for collaborative purchasing. So this is just the cost-benefit analysis as mentioned before. We estimate that within the various ranges as a group, that all Frontenac municipalities could achieve savings of $400,000 upwards of $1.3 million. There are other factors that currently challenge the Frontenacs in taking advantage of the potential cost savings and other benefits of collaborative procurement. And I won't dive too deeply into them as they have been discussed already, but those include things like the geographic realities of the Frontenacs, as well as the unique requirements of each municipality when endeavoring to issue a tender or an RFP. However, we believe that these challenges underscore the importance of the role of the procurement specialist in navigating those challenges wherever possible so that the Frontenacs can achieve the full potential benefit of collaborative procurement.
Okay.
So with that.
So just in the interest of time, I am going to sprint through, I believe we have 4 left, and happy to hopefully leave some time left at the end for questions. And, you know, obviously available for any follow-up after if there are additional questions that any of you have. So the first one is an integrated digital strategy. The main focus here is trying to address the fact that municipal procurement for IT solutions involves county IT in a very disjointed and ad hoc fashion. So while municipalities all procure their own software solutions, IT is involved at different points in the process at the discretion of the departments procuring a solution, which results in a few suboptimal outcomes. There are various improvement opportunities left on the table. Technology is not appropriately leveraged to its greatest extent, and you're missing out on opportunities to share investment in joint platforms that might not make sense on a case-by-case basis. So by implementing a new process, and much of the core foundation of this is already in place with the county having a business analyst and an approach to doing this, that formally integrates municipal software procurement with the county as a key part of the decision-making process, will enable you to do a few things. The first is to better identify opportunities for shared investment and to better leverage the technology that already exists. And a key component of this is developing a formal process to build a 5-year forward-looking roadmap to better invest resources in technology investments over time. So in order to quantify this, we took a look at one opportunity, and that was digital records management, which was highlighted as something that each municipality wanted to look at, but that didn't make sense to look at on a case-by-case basis. And we found that the savings associated with it from both a dark green and a productivity savings perspective were very substantial associated with this. And the intent of in instituting a process like this is really to enable all of the municipalities to work together to identify more and more opportunities to digitize, to improve the use of technology over time, which will have substantial impacts on staff productivity. I think you can go to the next slide. There's more detail on the actual process and some of the considerations. Key, I would say, is that municipalities through a process like this will still have a final decision over any and all technology investments. The next one, I think we can go into the next one, is policy and process harmonization related to development services. And our review of this really focused on looking at the tools and processes that could be put in place to better enable planning and development services staff to manage demands on their time. We found a couple of things. One, that that county planning staff were generally unable to meet the targets and KPIs that are set out in their current shared service agreements, in particular, unable to spend enough time focused on regional policy and planning efforts. The target and the agreement is that 50% of their time should be dedicated to that. And in reality, this threshold is almost never met. It's something more like 20% in the estimation of staff. So we looked at a couple of things. The first is implementing a community planning permit system, which would reduce the amount of effort associated with minor variance approvals, and looking at future investments in technology to improve productivity. And what we found specifically around implementing a CPPS is that staff productivity would be enhanced to the tune of around $180,000 per year by implementing a process like this that would enable more efficient delivery of services. Next slide. Just to highlight, because this is of the remaining ones, the most complex. They're of the two challenges. The first area that I mentioned, when we looked at the policy tools that are in place for development staff to manage their workload, we found that the current approach, and in particular the requirement for minor variances to go through the committee adjustments process, regardless of complexity or potential impact to the environment, was really placing a significant strain on the ability of staff to address the demand for their services. And results in both lost productivity, but also a suboptimal service standard for residents and those attempting to utilize the process. Indicatively, applications in the current process can sit for more than 3 months awaiting approvals, which not only creates a significant challenge for staff, but also disincentivizes development as applications take a longer time than might be expected to be approved. The second issue related to records management, which is the focus of future technology investments, impacts both efficiency and also the ability to plan and staff up over time. And so we looked at various ways to better collect and manage information associated with development and planning over time as well. Next slide. These two slides we can just skip over, but essentially we looked at the current process for minor variances, as well as estimating the amount of time and effort associated with each, and found a pretty substantial lost productivity associated with that. A community planning permit system really is laid out in the table here, but really looks like finding ways to delegate authority for approvals for things that do not require substantial relief from bylaws to staff to resolve without going through the process. And then focusing the committee of adjustment variations on those that do require substantial relief from the standards. And so are reserved for sort of the higher value, more complex decisions that need to be made. When we reviewed the process and looked at how this was implemented in other jurisdictions around the province, we found that we estimated that staff productivity associated with minor variance approvals could be improved by 2/3, which is how we got to the 180,000 in annual staff time savings. Next slide. A couple of examples of places where this has been implemented, but I think we can go on to the next improvement opportunity just in the interest of time. Coordinated legal services, what we looked at was the legal spend by each of the municipalities and what types of matters that legal spend was dedicated to, and found that by recruiting a shared legal services coordinator to coordinate all of the administrative legal functions on behalf of the Frontenac municipalities, and then issuing joint RFPs to jointly procure legal services could substantially reduce costs and improve efficiency to the tune of up to $50,000 a year in dark green savings and about $40,000 a year in productivity savings. Next slide. I think we can go on to the next area as well. Human resources coordination, which is the last initiative, really looked at creating an intermunicipal working group of staff to share best practices and support knowledge transfer, including around the development and maintenance of policies. There were opportunities identified for North Frontenac and Frontenac Islands to explore outsourcing of HR services. And the big ticket item in terms of cost savings was the opportunity to pool benefits by expanding the consortium that Frontenac Islands and South Frontenac already participate in to the other municipalities, which could result in fairly substantial costs or cost reductions associated with employee benefits. To the tune of about $250,000 a year in dark green savings and $68,000 a year in staff productivity savings. So I believe that is each of the initiatives that we wanted to deep dive in. I know we didn't have enough time to go into some of the ones at the tail end there in too great a detail, and that there's likely questions associated with them.
I just had one quick question. It's Ron Higgins, North Frontenac. The light green savings, 60,000 for North Frontenac. Can you expand what that is? Productivity?
Yeah, so if we go look at what Central Frontenac is already doing is they're outsourcing some of their operational HR functions. And in North, what we saw is that the HR burden is mostly on your most senior staff. So what we're calculating here is that having a similar contract that is working well for Central Frontenac, that you actually would be allowing your senior staff to do more strategic, high value work.
So, but when I look at that number, that's a staff person in itself, 60K a year in staff time. Would it be, did you look at the option of hiring an HR person versus outsourcing?
We tested it with your staff members, and they thought of that the Central Frontenac has experienced such tremendous benefit of this outsourced model that it could be something that North would be interested in. Obviously, these are light green dollars, so there is a cost of outsourcing. It would be, I think we said 13,000 or so about for North to do that. So it's actually more cost effective to do the sourcing model. It's working extremely well in Central.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions or comments? If we could take the screen sharing down, then I could see everyone. There we go, thank you. Okay, one of the questions I would have for the consultants is, can you send us the presentation tonight so that we can go through some of those numbers more carefully? We did go through them quickly.
You sent
Are there any?
Clerk, but we can resend for sure.
Okay. Questions or comments? I think we all need more time to go through these on our own and start our discussions. And I was glad to see that the time we went for 3 or 4 years. Ron?
Will they be sending this report to all members of all the councils?
I think it should go to all members of council. We're all in this and we all need to know what the numbers are and where they've come from. What do other people think? Thumbs up if you think it should go to everyone.
Yeah.
Yes, for
our
sure.
members.
Okay. So if you want to send it to the CAOs, they'll send it out to everyone. Okay. Well,
Madam Warden, it is already available. All you have to do is print it off.
okay. But I don't think the councillors have it. Maybe just county councillors, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Right. Okay.
No, our council
Well,
has it, I believe.
okay.
It was sent to the clerk last Friday, so.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, if I may, this is Victor
Yes,
here.
Victor?
Yeah, I have the whole report as well. So it was sent to us.
Okay. Obviously, I didn't find mine yet. It's buried in many emails.
Madam Warden, it is attached to the agenda under their presentation. So that's where you can find the attachment on either iCompass.
Okay, good. Okay, I want to thank our consultants very much. That was lots of work. There are going to be questions and we'll have lots of them, I'm sure, as we take some more time with this report. Kelly, do you want to just tell us where we go from here or how we go from here?
Thank you, Madam Warden. There is a staff report attached to your agenda that the 5 CAOs prepared for your consideration this evening, including a motion that sets forth some of the process that we're recommending going forward, which is essentially that it goes back to each council and each council review the report in greater detail and determine which initiatives they wish to participate in, provide direction to their CAOs, and that we bring back a further report based upon that feedback early in the first quarter of 2021. So with that, if the clerk could read the motion, then you can consider that, amend, delete, defeat, do as you wish.
Okay.
So through you, Madam Warden.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, through you, Madam Warden. It's moved by Councillor Martin and seconded by Councillor Revel. Be it resolved that the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer Joint Service Delivery Review by Strategy Corp report be received, and further that the report of Strategy Corp be received, and further that each municipal council review the opportunities in greater detail and provide direction to their chief administrative officers regarding their intent to participate in potential opportunities, and that this input be circulated to all municipalities at their earliest opportunity. And further, that County Council requests county staff to work with the partner municipalities staff to provide an implementation strategy for the potential opportunities that could include the county to a joint session of the Frontenac municipalities in the first quarter of 2021.
Okay, any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Seth Frontenac in favor.
Ron Vanderwall?
Yes.
Okay, motion's carried. We have one more motion to get through, a couple. Change in location of the October 20 and 21st meeting. Jeanette, you want to read that motion?
Thank you, Madam Warden. Moved by Councillor Doyle, seconded by Councillor Higgins. Be it resolved that the location of the regular meeting of County Council scheduled for October 21, 2020, and the Committee of the Whole 2021 budget deliberations scheduled for October 21, 20 and 21, 2020, be moved from the County Administration offices to the Township of South Frontenac Council Chamber, 4432 George Street, Sydenham.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
I'm
Yes.
assuming
Yeah,
that
Councilor Revel in
it's going to
favor.
be an in-person meeting, not a virtual. Is that correct?
It is in person, yes.
But the
Well, Matt-
option is there, Madam Warden, we also discussed the option of someone zooming in also.
Kelly, was that also an option? I think initially we were going to just do Zoom, and then it was decided we needed to be face-to-face because of the budget information. So I don't think we did have a Zoom as part of it. Kelly, is that right?
Well, at your discretion, Council, but certainly we have the technology to Zoom somebody in if they don't feel comfortable. I certainly wouldn't want to put any council member in the position where they were uncomfortable attending. We have about the same limit on attendance at the South Frontenac Council meeting as we do in the Frontenac room. So with 11, we'll be able to have our senior staff, but some of our presentations will Zoom in.
Okay. Okay, so it will be either Zoom or in person. Okay, all those in favor?
Revel, yes.
Opposed?
Yes, I'm in favor. The only comment I would make, though, is if you aren't coming, you should let somebody know. Because
Right,
then it would
because-
change the seating arrangement.
Yes, and we're going to need some food, I believe, as well.
Thank you, Central Frontenac, for picking up that tab, too. We appreciate it.
I'll flip you for it. Okay, that motion's carried. All right, bylaws.
Moved by Councillor Higgs, seconded by Councillor Martin. Resolved that leave be given to the mover to introduce bylaw A that has been circulated to all members of County Council, and that bylaw A be read a first and second time.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Hands up. Motion's carried.
Moved by Councillor Higgs, seconded by Councillor
reading.
Martin. Moved by Councillor Higgs, seconded by Councillor Martin. Resolved that bylaw A be read a third time, signed, sealed, and finally passed.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Yes.
Motion's carried. Okay, our confirmatory bylaw.
Sorry, Madam Warden, that was the three readings for the confirmatory bylaw, and now there's just a motion to adjourn. So that
Yes.
is
Okay.
moved by Councillor
Motion to adjourn.
Higgins. Moved by Councillor Higgins, seconded by Councillor Doyle, that the meeting hereby adjourn at 8:39 p.m.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Twice.
Motion's carried. Okay, thanks, everyone. Good meeting, long, but lots of information.
And thank
Good night.
you, Madam Warden.
Night, everyone.